To go back to your question about what do you do with poor soil condition, how do you deal with it, and to me, it's going to depend. The driving factors are going to be budget, what does the customer want, and what's your design vision, right? And the balance of those, because certainly you could deal with the existing that's there, and there's stuff that'll grow with a minimal amount of dealing with your soil. And then there's, if the budget's there, you can import. It's obviously a less sustainable approach to all out import. But I think there's, the sustainable approach is amend what's there, bring in a lot of organic, and again, let the soil biology take over and deal with, maybe more hardy plant material.
I'll comment.
Yeah, I think I wanted to say two quick things. One is that maybe this is a spectrum, of course, in which we're operating on, so it's not like all soils are either relatively good pasture land soils and half of them are that and then half of them are terrible and kind of inhabitable by plants. So I guess I would just urge anybody that's having to make a decision about what to do with the soils to really think critically about whether or not it is a case where you need to disrupt it or bring in something new, because there might be those cases. I think that, from a environmental scientist perspective, I want to think there's very few of those cases, but I can always also understand that in the real world that you do have budgets and demands, and you might have a really bad soil that somebody's dredged up from somewhere and you can't grow anything on. So those cases, yeah, definitely do what you need to do to have something growing there. And but once you've accomplished growing something there, I would also say that one thing to think about is how are you going to manage that soil once you do have something growing there, and really minimizing the amount of irrigation, minimizing the amount of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers is really going to be helpful from a sustainability perspective. And compost, just to throw that out there one more time, is one way to do that pretty relatively easily, because you can add compost. It's a slow release fertilizer. You can add it once in the beginning of a project. You probably don't have to replace it very often. You probably don't have to go out there every year and add it to your soils. So you're going to get a lot of benefits from just kind of a one-time application. Just something to think about.
I think it's exactly right. You've got to look at your particular site. In the case of the comment that you don't want to disrupt a soil that's already partially structured, in my mind I'm thinking about upland soils. Even if they're subsoils, they've got some structure in already, so be nice to those things. In the case of the Bay mud, or some of these other places, it's already mixed up, there is no soil structure. So at that point, you've got to ask the question, how can the water get off the surface and down where the roots ought to get? And is it going to be deep enough that in these hot days you don't consistently evaporate off a bunch of water, get a bunch of shallow eroding, and get some salts build up? Because we're going to run out of water here along with soil and space. Get the water deep so it doesn't just go away. In the case of a non-soil down in the South Bay at Highway 85 in Winchester, this used to be the old bypass route when they built that bridge. So we inherited this thing would hardly grow Zorro fescue. And what we did, and we dug it up, and it was 60% cobble, so it was almost a structural soil. We mixed 25% yard waste compost in with it and fluffed it up, and then as it settles, the rocks start to hit each other, form that structure, and the fines start to flow around it. We got those plants to grow last summer with no irrigation, with one late winter wet up, either from rain or from irrigation one time, and they're all California native species. We dug the heck out of it. It's a 4-foot trench, but we want those roots to be deep where they will find late summer water and not have a bunch of evaporation issues. So in that case, it was already tore up. I tore it up again, and you can see it on Google Earth. You can see my little trenches. Still there.
just have one question.
Just one question for this group, because it seems like yard waste compost is coming up a lot this evening. And I'm curious, from this group, how many people are aware of yard waste compost? It's really a new thing, but by show of hands. So a good amount of people. And I think, as we progress, it'll become more available. It'll be a better product. We are at the beginning of the next 100 years in terms of composting. This is a baby. This is an infant. And compost will be readily available so that we will minimize trucking. And done right, the yard waste compost is tested. We're able to see a report on it, and I think it'll get more widely used as it becomes, more refined, and it's definitely a progress. So I'm just blown away. I don't have to say a word tonight.
Well, for people who are not familiar with what yard waste compost is, or they want to specify it, or there's a concern, the owner says, well, aren't I going to have to put this on every year? I heard it breaks down. I mean, what are we supposed to say to that?
As we've heard before, it is definitely a slow release. It stays in the soil, obviously holds water well. Obviously, every application is different. There is a lot of information online. There are many municipalities who are providing yard waste compost. However, the contamination issue is right now a problem. So as we educate the community to separate garbage, make available bins that are large enough at your curb, the contamination will decrease. Right now, yard waste compost from municipalities is a challenging issue. And we've got hundreds of thousands of tons of organics that the state of California is saying, let's find a home for this. Let's not put it in the landfill. Let's get it spec'd. Let's get it in the application. There are lab reports readily available, and we are fortunate enough to have the greatest lab in Watsonville, California, the Soil and Control Lab. There's also one in San Jose, Plant and Soil Lab? Soil and Plant, yes. And then, I'm not sure if the Geotech in Palo Alto is doing it, but they might be available anyway. There are lab tests, and unfortunately, right now, this is at the beginning of a brand new product, and we're just going to have to deal. We're just going to have to deal.
What kind of contaminants do you feel are the most problematic?
The most problematic are plastic bags that people use for their leaves that get thrown in and get ground up into a billion pieces. There's trash in multiple family homes that just do not have a large enough garbage bin at the curb, so that when that fills up, sometimes trash is put in the green bin because there's some space there. It's basically plastics.
And compostable plastics.
And compostable plastics, because the companies providing the compostable materials are not all on board. And we haven't figured out a way for the compostable plastics to break down quick enough to really go through the composting process with the biological activity. But plastics are the main problem. Glass.
What happens if there's plastic in the compost? What's the negative effect of that?
I'm sorry, what was the other comment?
Well, they're not toxic to the soil, they're inert.
I don't know if they would be toxic, but maybe it's just a stigma. Someone else can answer that question about contamination and what it might do to the soil. Is that, I believe, the question?
Yeah, it's okay, we need breaks.
So the plastics in the compost, I think it's more of a visual thing. They're usually really, what?
They're colorful.
They are colorful. So we were able to find like these little tiny pieces of plastic. You probably, if you're looking close enough at grass in any park, it's not going to really be any different than that. But it is odd that you find these little tiny pieces of plastic. So, but it's not affecting the plants or anything. It's just out there like confetti. The other concern about contamination is with composting foods, but that's not the type of compost that you're going to find available right now, so that's nothing you need to worry about yet. And there are a lot of people doing research into composting done well will get rid of everything. So there are people working on making sure that the compost would possibly include some of those kind of contaminations would never end up in the hands of consumer. What is the other thing? Well, I'll just pass it on. Do you want to?
No two composts are really the same. We really should treat it like apples and oranges. Each compost is for a specific application, and their CN ratios vary widely. The food waste compost, which unfortunately at this point is not readily available, but in 10 years, we'll have all the food waste compost we could want.
Yeah, so I just want to say also on this point that I remembered, you ask for it. Look into it, look into compost and ask for it, because it's really one of the biggest solutions that we have for greenhouse gas emissions and for waste management. And it's a tremendous resource. This stuff is so good for the soils. The plants love it, and croplands, pasture lands, gardens. It's really wonderful. And the only way that we're going to get to the point where we have enough studies that are showing that we can have the composting facilities all be certified and producing the top quality compost that we all already know how to produce in a lot of ways is if it's in demand. And I think that your group probably is a big amount of the demand for this type of thing.
Yeah.
I can just say it. So one of the things I forgot to mention that is back there on the counter is a list of locally available composts and mulches, actually. And a lot of them are from yard waste. Some are actually also from food waste too. And they do indicate whether or not what certifications they have. I don't know if you guys are going to talk about that, but that's a good indicator of quality. So there's OMRI, which is the Organic Materials Review Institute, and they can confer a designation on a compost, and you know it's good, right? And a couple other ones. I'll let those guys talk about it, but it's back there.
Is there anything to worry about in terms of herbicides and pesticides? Do those
Yes.
actually?
In
Compost?
not done right compost.
Well, not in getting it, usually, it's in destroying it after in your maintenance contractor, and what are the practices with pesticides and herbicides
Well,
and synthetic fertilizers.
She's talking
right,
about
but
compost.
I'm talking about in the composting
purchasing
process. Is it eliminated? I mean.
Yeah, you already heard that the PFRP, the process to further reduce pathogens, eliminates what you're asking about. The cooking of the material done right. Yard waste compost, food waste compost goes through a rigorous process so that all of those bad things get eliminated.
Predominantly, I'm going to say that's true for many things. But if you're thinking back 10 years ago, there was and I don't remember the chemical anymore, that would persist through the composting. It was an herbicide for chlorpyrifos. And that is now pulled off of the California markets, right? So we should not have that issue. But you'll hear people say, this stuff has herbicides, pesticides. My main problem is it grows too many weeds because it's so fertile. So I think the chlorpyrifos thing is done for a while. And it used to be 20 years ago, we had a lot of metal issues, metal loading, and that's done. So the thing is really cleaned up now. Even the air separating of plastics, we get loads of compost in, and I know what it's looking like out at the yard, and it is so clean now, it's phenomenal because of the industrial side to clean this stuff up.